Hello and welcome to News Desk. I'm Melissa Chan.
And I'm Alex Forrest Whiting.
This week we are looking at Sri Lanka's election, which took place this past weekend. We're going to start by sharing some reactions from voters once they learned that Anura Kumara Dissanayake won the presidency.
I've been waiting for this victory since 1994, and I got it today. We are inheriting a nation in a deep crisis. I am not a conjurer. I am not a magician.
How is the president now, the new president, able to navigate a very complicated terrain?
We want him to reduce the cost of living and improve the economic situation for poor people.
People are expecting a new president with a new rule.
We haven't had any change for the past 76 years. We'll see what happens in the next 5.
So who is Dissanayake? He's been described as a leftist. What kind of leftist or Marxist is he? And what does this all mean for the country? And we'll be explaining, as our headline states, why Sri Lanka's election matters to the rest of South Asia.
And we've already had some of your thoughts on that from our community post, which I've got some of those here. Let me just read them out. Athel says, finally, we got a leader who loves the country and the people. Varun Non says, someone who's not from a dynasty, that's refreshing. Like most Marxists, he will come to his economic senses once in power. But on that issue of Marxism, we have had quite a few comments about the claim that he is a Marxist. Marlon Tarusha says, I am sick of foreign media who keep telling that he's Marxist, which he isn't. He's centre-left, and we will certainly be discussing that a little bit later in the stream. And Petsu Konin says, what's good about a democratic system is that it can always vote out unsuitable candidates. If he's unfit, he'll be voted out next time. In an authoritarian regime, the unfit stays basically forever. So do please keep your questions and your comments coming, and we will try to get to them as quickly and as thoroughly as we can.
We will. And joining us around the table to look at the chat and pick up your questions and comments along with Alex, we have Jared Reed and Cherie Chan. Down the line, we will soon also have DW's Akanksha Saxena, who was recently reporting from Sri Lanka. So she'll be here in a few minutes. And later on News Desk, we're going to have Michael Kugelman from the Wilson Center. He is the director of South Asia there. And we've had him on before. Very informative for the bigger, more regional perspective. So, Cherie, I know that you've been working on a poll just to kick things off, as usual. And, of course, the purpose of the poll is for you guys to participate, but also to encourage you to post those questions. So what do you got for us?
Yeah, so as usual, we have a poll for you. And today we're asking, what's the most important task for Sri Lanka's new president? The first option is relations with China and India. Second, political stability. The third, reforming the economy. And the last one is tackling corruption. So remember to vote. We had some technical issues before, so our poll was closed previously, but now it's open again.
Right.
Yeah, and we will talk about the results later.
Yeah, and we'll give you plenty of time to vote because you might not know too much about Sri Lanka. So you might want to hear part of the conversation before you decide how you want to vote. So just to get people familiar with the 101, I know, Jared, that you can help us explain what happened this past weekend.
Yeah, there's been a lot that has happened. These elections that have just taken place, they come off the back of some pretty terrible times for Sri Lanka's people. There was a national economic crisis in 2022 that saw an uprising that toppled the government. People were just furious at this many years of economic mismanagement that really impoverished millions of people. And this was an opportunity for the now president, Dissanayake. He promised to tackle corruption in Sri Lankan politics and also ease some of these quite severe and unpopular austerity measures that had been put in place under the terms of an IMF bailout. Some of these promises, I know you're going to talk about them a bit later, because there's a lot of questions about how much he can actually deliver on those promises and how much he can realistically do under the terms of this bailout without, I guess, going against the terms of the bailout and also scaring market. So this is something we can talk about a little bit later. But Dissanayake has come himself a very long way in a few short years. He got 3% of the presidential vote in 2019. Fast forward 5 years, a whopping 42%. Wow. It's a really, really long way. He's almost 10% ahead of his nearest competitor. And in position number 3, the outgoing president, who we can bring up here, Wickremesinghe, he got 17% of the vote. That's him here. And these elections were also seen, I guess, as a referendum on how he was doing and how he led these very unpopular economic recovery measures, where Sri Lanka has returned to growth now, but millions and millions of people are still struggling to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. The IMF itself has also said that Sri Lanka, while it's come a long way, it is not out of the woods yet. Dissanayake seems really acutely aware of the strength of his win and, I guess, the hopes of many, many millions of people that have come along with that. So he's tried to, I guess, give everyone a little bit of a reality check about what's realistic, and we can hear some of what he had to say about that.
We are inheriting a nation in a deep crisis. This crisis cannot be overcome by a government, a political party, or an individual alone. I'm not a conjurer or a magician. I'm a common citizen. I have strengths and limitations. There are things I know and things I don't know. However, my priority is to identify capabilities, acquire the knowledge I lack, and make informed decisions to lead this country.
So some pretty candid admissions there from a politician saying, I will do my best, but I don't have the answers. I'm not a miracle worker. Whether this is, I guess, humility or maybe a bit of an insurance policy for the future, I guess we'll wait and see. So what happens now? Not to get all kind of financy again, but one of his main priorities is to pass a debt restructuring deal negotiated by his predecessor. And that's something maybe Michael Kugelman will be able to talk about a little bit later. But this is a little bit tricky because Dissanayake's party in the current parliament only has 3 seats. And while he has quite a bit of power, executive power as the president, in order for him to be able to do what he promised and also even pass a budget, that's going to be difficult without parliamentary support. Right. So this is why he's called snap elections. He said he was going to do that, and now he has done that. Basically, he's hoping that he will be able to, I guess, continue to ride this wave of approval, consolidate his power, and get some of his agenda in place. And that election will be happening in November, and I guess we'll be watching that very closely.
Thank you so much, Jared, for explaining the basics.
I feel that was very good.
And it's very hard to explain and a hard thing to do.
Because a lot's happened, hasn't it, in the past few years. Just a couple of thoughts have come through on the chat so far. We've got Shean Vera Sekera, sorry for the pronunciation, AKD, that's what the president's nickname is, and the rest of his party members are educated, and that's the difference. And again, quite a few messages still saying he does not come from Marxism, he is not a Marxist, which we will be talking about a little bit later. But we are getting what you're saying, and certainly we will touch on this.
Excellent, excellent. And of course, your questions, because now we're going to bring in for our first guest, not really guest, part of the family joining us is DW's very own Akanksha Saxena. Welcome to the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks, Alex and Jed.
Now, I know you've been reporting from Sri Lanka until fairly recently. Before we get into the outcome of these elections and what they mean, I want to actually start by playing some video footage. Let's get that rolling of scenes from 2 years ago. Because if you haven't been following things very closely in Sri Lanka, this was most likely the last time you saw major international news headlines from the country. There were a lot of protests. People were really, really unhappy, and they were also essentially storming the presidential palace because they were so frustrated, to the point that the leader at the time, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, had to flee. And this was in the context of the economy essentially imploding. There were weeks and weeks of protests and people getting in line just to get food and fuel. They would be in line for hours. Inflation was completely out of control. So that's where things were 2 years ago. Akanksha, I also actually want to go from here. I mean, there's such dramatic pictures of the storming with the tear gas, everything. It's incredible.
And before seeing them swimming in the pool, the presidential palace, wasn't it? The swimming pool.
Yeah. People were cooking in there, taking small bits of objects from there. So it's just really incredible what the country has gone through. And Akanksha, we also want to run just a short segment of one of your reports that aired recently, just to provide a bit more context. And then we're going to throw some questions your way. But let's get that video report of yours up so people just have a little bit of an idea of the work you were doing in Sri Lanka.
1 in 4 Sri Lankans live in poverty, the World Bank says. Their struggle to afford basic necessities like food, medicines and fuel triggered nationwide protests in 2022.
The economy has been bad for a long time. Just over 2 years ago, Sri Lankans protested here in central Colombo. They forced the president to flee and brought down the government. But the economy is still in crisis and still the #1 issue that voters want to see politicians tackle.
The future generation should stay here in Sri Lanka instead of going abroad for opportunities. That is what I want the government to ensure.
The need of the country is to economic recovery and also stability. And also people expect non-corrupt government.
So economy, that seems to be the thing that everyone is thinking about. Akanksha, can you tell us what has happened in the interim 2 years that took us up to the point of these elections in terms of the state of the country?
Right. So the situation has been bad in the last 2 years as well, but it has sort of gone into a place where, from a massive inflation, the situation stabilized a little bit. But that was mostly thanks to the promises of IMF bailout and also promises of other bilateral lenders to the country. But if you talk about what it really meant for people, the situation on the ground did not really change so much. The cost of living is really high. I mean, I was talking to a lot of people while I was in Colombo, and a lot of families had to basically take loans. They're under immense debt. Women in the family are pawning their jewelry, which is seen as their, like they only take this out when the economic situation is really severely impacted. They are finding it very, very hard to afford basic necessities like food. I mean, one of the persons I was talking to, and she's also in this story, she was telling me she's struggling to even buy coconut every day, which is part and parcel of their everyday cooking. So the situation has been really bad. I mean, the urban poverty rose well over, like 1 in 4 Sri Lankans are living under poverty, but almost 50% are dealing with economic consequences of one form or the other. So the situation has really been, stable if you talk about in terms of inflation, if you talk about, foreign currency reserves slightly increasing, or the growth really in 2024 is the first year Sri Lanka is registering economic growth in the last 2 years. So situation seems to be stabilizing because of political and economic factors. But is it really translating to common people? That's really not what I have seen. People are still reeling under huge debt. They're still reeling under the price of basic commodities that had skyrocketed. Yeah.
And so, given the scenes that we just saw from 2 years ago, given what you've just said about things being still really bad, was it a surprise to you that these elections were relatively peaceful? I mean, some people were really worried about these elections.
I mean, I also saw that there was a lot of discontent among people, but I think people were really listening to what the different politicians had to offer. I attended a rally in Negombo, which is just a city outside of the capital, Colombo, and that rally was of Anura Kumara Dissanayake, or AKD, as you said, he's popularly called. And people actually stopped to listen to what he had to offer, what he had to say. I mean, I was listening to him intently as well. There was a train just right behind, next to the event station, event where the event was taking place, and the train actually slowed down, and people were like really looking out of the window to listen to what he has to say. And he was promising, an overhaul of sorts of the system, because I think the problems that people are facing are more systemic as well. They're talking about corruption. They're talking about cost of living. They're talking. They do not have a lot of faith left in the political system of the country. So they were seeing AKD as this sort of person who could probably take them out of the situation, although he has less experience when it comes to ruling the country. I mean, he really just had 3 seats in the parliament, which is now, we are looking into early elections. So yeah, people were looking for a change for a long time. The protests in 2022 were also basically were signaling towards a change that people wanted. And the election results really show that. I mean, this is a meteoric rise for AKD. He was, his party was seen as a fringe party.
Yeah, I mean, could you talk a little bit about that? Like, is he really a Marxist, as people say?
Yeah, we have had so many questions in the chat or comments saying he is not a Marxist. That's what most people seem to be saying. But
yeah,
he is certainly not.
Just sort of explain exactly. Yeah.
I wouldn't call him Marxist per se. I will call him left-leaning. His party is definitely left-leaning, but his party, he's part of a coalition now, but his party, JVP, in the 1980s was connected to violent insurgencies. And, they were also accused of, they were reactionaries, basically. It was involved in targeted assassinations and stuff like that. So Anura Kumara Dissanayake a few years ago has actually apologized for the party's past. And it's seen as, again, it was in the past a left reactionary party, if you might want to call it. But at this point, he also, like, if you talk about what he's promising, he has promised, to help with austerity measures so that, he's talking about anti-corruption measures. He's talking about, so he's moved on from that past to kind of what Sri Lanka is looking, to build up, increase its growth rate, and how they are going to do that. I think, but his biggest priorities remain economic growth, jobs for people, bringing the cost of living to low. He has been talking to leaders again in India and China as well. So he's not coming with a lot of experience here in terms of ruling, but because it is also an unprecedented time for Sri Lanka. Let's not forget, in its past, from 1948, when it took independence, this is the first time a president has been elected with a second choice vote, which means that no clear winner emerged, and it was the second choice vote that made him into the winner. So he comes with a lot of hopes and expectations, and let's see if he's able to deliver that with his policies, seen closely connected with China ideologically, I would say.
I mean, it sounds like he started out ideological, but as he has faced the reality of him actually becoming a leader, the pragmatism kicked in, which we've seen, regardless of people's ideology from both the right and left.
Correct,
World
yeah.
leaders sort of facing the realities of what they have to do. Anything in chat?
Well, yes,
or-
actually, I wanted to pick up on one thing. There have been quite a few comments about something that you just mentioned there, corruption. Savi says, I am from Sri Lanka. While reforming the economy and ensuring political stability are important, the most critical issue here is addressing the long-standing corruption. Punsara says lots of previous politicians were so corrupt. That's why investors run away from this country. The new leader believes in zero corruption. You can't even think about the economy without stopping that. And Xavier 2.0 says Sri Lanka's economic crisis is a result of its political crisis. Therefore, the most important task of the new president is to fix the political culture and tackle corruption. So that seems to be a very, very strong thread going through our chat at the moment, this whole issue of corruption.
Yeah, can he do it? Can he fight corruption? What do you think, Akanksha?
Well, you know, people are right about it because corruption has been a long-standing debate in the country. I mean, there used to be in the previous government of Rajapaksas who had ruled over the country for about 2 decades. This is a very strong family. They were winners of the, war in Sri Lanka 15 years ago that ended, and they emerged victorious, and people loved them back then because, it ended this long-standing war in Sri Lanka. But soon after they got into the power, there were allegations of, wrongdoings, corruption, money laundering. And if I can say that one of the Rajapaksa's brothers is called as Mr. 10%. This is a popular term you ask any Sri Lankan. He's called Mr. 10% because for any government, contract that he would give or his government would give, it was an unsaid rule that he would get 10% of the cut, as they may want to call it, right? So and these are allegations, but he's called that for a reason. He was being called this for a long time. And I sat down with the foreign minister Ali Sabri and had asked him what is his government doing to ensure that the corruption allegations are looked into and that there is some clarity in terms of, people deserve to know about where their hard-earned money is going, their taxes. So he did really brush it off in saying that the real problems are somewhere else. And I think they really did not, they overlooked it and they did not see this, as an issue that people really feel very strongly about at this moment in Sri Lanka. So corruption remains a big problem. And obviously the economic crisis and the causes of it, there are many reasons for it, including the huge bilateral debts that the country has with its partners. But corruption for people remain a very important and big reason that they voted on this time.
So we have the economy, we have the corruption. In terms of tackling the corruption, we know that there's going to be parliamentary elections. It might be early days, but do you have a sense that the people will then vote more members of his party into parliament in order for him to carry out what he has promised?
I would say that he's had a meteoric rise for the presidential elections. And I think his pick for the prime minister, who's, is also someone who has a reformist approach to things. It remains to be seen in the next few weeks how she is going to also, revamp or make changes. But I think Sri Lanka is at a very critical juncture and it can really build up. But in the elections, I'm not somebody who's a cephalogist can really predict. But I think it looks very good for AKD at this point, for Anura Kumara Dissanayake and his party. I think he has called in early elections in November, also ride on the wave of this popularity that he has received, and he's the president. This was something which was, you could say, that was not it was unimaginable even like 2 years ago.
Can we talk a little bit about the fact, I mean, my understanding, I was looking at the other candidates for president, he appears to be the only one who is not, the way we would say it, is not a Nepo baby, not someone whose parents...
In the family.
Yeah, were already held political power or were wealthy or had something like that. Was he really the only person among the candidate list who we can reliably say, kind of was self-made?
Largely so. Sri Lanka has been ruled by political parties well into their 70s, 80s, 60s, back till the Rajapaksas, or people with strong political lineage or links or pedigree. Either somebody in the family was a politician. So you really have seen families ruling this nation. And with him, I think one of the connect was also that he is a commoner, a common person who's risen through the ranks. I mean, he really, when you listen to him talking in the political rallies, he talks about his very humble beginnings. And he talks about that he came from nowhere. I think it is it's a sign of what people connect with, because they think that he can understand what the common people are going through, especially because of the economic woes and the failing economy. So they understand, power. He understands poverty, understand living with limited means in a country like Sri Lanka. So people connect with him. So he doesn't boast of a pedigree, but he has been a career politician. He has been a politician for a long time. You wouldn't say that he knows nothing about politics. Of course, he understands. He's risen through the ranks in the party as well. AKD is not coming from he's not a sign of a politician. He's not coming from a political lineage. But he is very much a politician. He's very much someone who understands the politics of the country. And he has pitched himself as someone who can take ordinary citizens out of this crisis because of that.
Just in the chat, there is quite a lot of... quite a few people are talking about India's role. Just to say to those of you in the chat, we are going to talk more about India, about China and the whole region a little bit later.
Just in a few minutes, very soon.
So we're not ignoring your questions, but we will certainly be putting those to our experts. But just we are seeing you, so just so you know that.
Akanksha, I just want to ask, I mean, do you, as we head into more talking about things regionally, I can't help but think that there's some relationship or parallel, at least, with what's happened with Bangladesh in terms of almost, I mean, you say AKD was a career politician, so slightly different. Yunus has not been a career politician, but both men sort of idealistic and at least speaking the rhetoric of being committed to working on alleviating poverty. Is this, I don't know if there is comments on social media or whether anyone makes remarks about the fact that this kind of thing is happening in two countries in South Asia, and whether that is inspiring and hopeful for people?
I think it's very interesting that you say that. I think what's really happened is you've seen almost people's power in both the cases coming, them deciding into who should rule the country. And they both, people in both the countries came on the streets, in Sri Lanka in 2022. And in Bangladesh just this year, when you saw so many people protest. And it's also, you can draw parallels here when you see, as we were showing earlier, people swimming in the pool, that belonged to the president. After he was ousted, he was, basically ousted from the country. He had to flee Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2022 in Sri Lanka. And you've seen similar scenes taking place in Bangladesh as well. So you can actually draw a lot of parallels when it comes to people's, and hope. It gives hope to a lot of, a lot of countries. At the same time, I would like to really underline that those two are very different countries and very different contexts.
Absolutely.
And they are not the same. And, the reasons behind AKD coming to power and democratically at this point, and in Bangladesh, we are still waiting for, an election to take place. They're completely different contexts. But there's one thing which is very interesting at this point is how these relations are now going to be defined with India and China, who are like really the big super player in this entire region. And those things are going to be very interesting as well.
Well, since you mention it, let's bring in Michael Kugelman. Thank you so much for joining us. A reminder, Michael is with the Wilson Center. He's the director of the South Asia Institute. Thank you so much. I know it's morning over there, so we're the first thing probably that you're dealing with this morning.
Great to start my day off with you guys. So great to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
Michael, I just want to backtrack a little bit, and then we're going to talk about India and China. But, this term austerity that keeps getting thrown around and doesn't get really explained. Could you talk a little bit about what that actually means for ordinary people? I know they say it's belt tightening and spending less money, and they're helping with the debts that Sri Lanka owes. But what does that actually translate into in real world terms?
Yeah, I mean, in very simple terms, it entails cutting costs and generating more revenue from the perspective of the government. So what that means, generally speaking, is that you're going to have fewer subsidies, which means that common people aren't going to be seeing discounts, reductions in cost of essential commodities, both food and fuel. It means that social welfare policies, public welfare policies will be reined in. It means that taxation will oftentimes be increased. And the ironic thing is that these are, of course, policies that governments carry out in order to meet obligations to the IMF to get IMF financing. But these are policies that can indeed hurt the common people, and they tend to be applied at the very moment when people are already experiencing economic hardship. That's when the IMF tends to come in many cases. And so, if you look at this in a Sri Lanka context, the previous president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, he had essentially declared that he had really eased Bangladesh's economic stress by upholding these austerity obligations. And he had done the things that I had mentioned are things that are typically done with austerity measures, and that had lowered inflation, it had replenished foreign reserves and all that. But because of the austerity measures, you continue to see and have continued to see so many people in Sri Lanka grappling with high cost of living, incomes that are very low. And if you look at some of the data that the Sri Lankan government itself had put out in recent months about average household income levels in both urban and rural areas, they were quite low. And in a sense, this just makes it difficult on a very literal level for many people to put food on the table. And so even though macroeconomically, in a broad sense, the economy had stabilized, for so many across the country, things are really still bleak. And of course, this is one reason why, one of the many reasons why Dissanayake was able to win this election, because he really capitalized on that, on the fact that so many people were still suffering, several years after the economic crisis was at its worst point.
But just on that point, it's Alex here, hello. Just on that point, do you think he can actually make a difference? Because does he have any room to manoeuvre there to make a difference to people's lives? Because there isn't any money.
Yeah, I mean, there is more money than there had been. I mean, the austerity measures have ensured that there's more revenues coming in, and higher taxes. That's brought in more revenue, and of course, there is an IMF package that was finalized last year, so there is more money coming in. But you're right; it's going to be very difficult for the new president. And one thing that's striking is that even though he ran on a platform, he ran on several platforms. One of the platforms he ran on was this idea of restoring relief, economic relief for the common people. But he hasn't really been very specific about how he intends to do that. One of the things he's promised to do is to renegotiate or try to renegotiate the current IMF deal so that it no longer hurts the poor as much. He wants it to be renegotiated so the rich are taxed more than the poor. Well, that all sounds well and good, but if you really need that IMF deal, and even he agrees that Sri Lanka needs that IMF deal, you have to be very careful if you try to renegotiate the deal. If the IMF doesn't like what he's trying to make a pitch for, it may decide it's not willing to continue to provide funds. I think that what AKD wants to do is focus on anti-corruption and hope that by cleaning up politics, cleaning up public institutions, including economic institutions, that will make it easier to implement economic policies that will actually benefit the poor. But that'll take a long time, even if he's successful. So for me, one of the big questions is, what does he actually plan to do? We haven't seen a formal economic blueprints. I mean, on the campaign trail, he wasn't very specific about this. So that'll be tough. And he also is going to have to win over some skeptics in the business community who I think are a bit concerned about, his past record, as part of a party that carried out a violent campaign. He was a Marxist leader. And, I think the business community is also nervous about his pledge to renegotiate the IMF deal. So that's also important. He doesn't want to scare investors away. That's not what Sri Lanka needs now.
Now, Akanksha had mentioned his relative inexperience. I wonder if we could pivot now to the other important relations Sri Lanka has, starting with China. We'll go to India next. But on China, my understanding, of course, is that Sri Lanka has borrowed money from China, has taken investment money from China for infrastructure projects, and has been saddled with a lot of debt. As a result, where do things stand on that, and how does it sort of factor into the puzzle of the mountain of debt the country faces, along with this stuff they owe the IMF?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, China has become a very important partner for Sri Lanka ever since the end of Sri Lanka's civil war, which ended in 2009. And at that time, when the war finally ended, the Sri Lankan government at the time, which was led by the Rajapaksas, it wanted to rebuild the country and focus on doing that very quickly. And so China was a very viable, logical partner. It was willing to provide easy money, so to speak, with a lot of loans for infrastructure development and all of that. So, we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative and how Sri Lanka has become such a big destination for BRI funds, which it has. But, this taking on loans from China began well before BRI became a thing.
And Michael, hold on, while you're talking.
BRI and,
while you're talking, I'm going to ask Jared. I think you do have something related to BRI that we can show people, because it's the Belt and Road Initiative, but what does it look like? He's going to show a global map.
Exactly. We can, if Wade can bring that up now, we can get a really good kind of look at what that looks like here. Right.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead, Michael. We interrupted you.
But that is a great map.
But it's a maritime sort of link and also a road link. So trains, planes, automobiles. No, not quite, but more like ports and ships.
Sri Lanka sits there where I'm circling around, so you can see how that fits into the whole project.
So Sri Lanka is very important if you're looking at moving across the Indian Ocean. Sorry, Michael, I hope I didn't interrupt your train of thought too much, but please do continue. You were explaining about the Belt and Road Initiative and also Sri Lanka's taking all these investments during the Rajapaksa era. And if I do recall, you were saying that it started even before the official formal BRI started rolling out from Beijing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, in a nutshell, I was saying that Sri Lanka has looked to China for loans for many years, going way back, to right after the Civil War ended in 2009, and then in the decade that followed, that continued, and then BRI emerged more recently, and Sri Lanka continued to take on loans from China. And in fact, the BRI project that arguably is the most controversial of any BRI project is in Sri Lanka. The port in Hambantota, which the Rajapaksa government signed off on some years ago, this is the one that gave China a 99-year lease to develop and oversee that port. It was very controversial. Many in Sri Lanka didn't like it, but it was something the government did. So yeah, Sri Lanka has been heavily indebted, and Chinese loans are a big reason why. But I would note that, as in many cases where countries have taken in Chinese loans as part of BRI, it's not the only reason why there's debt. I would argue that Gotabaya Rajapaksa, during his last few years as president, he made a lot of bad decisions that made Sri Lanka even more heavily indebted and contributed to this horrific economic crisis that reached its worst point in 2022. He was trying to pay off Sri Lanka's debt with foreign reserves, which were very low at the moment. So it's just not a good thing to do. But moving forward, China will continue to be a key partner. And there's been a lot of attention brought to the fact that Dissanayake is a Marxist, or ideologically he's a Marxist. So that theoretically aligns him with China ideologically, which may be true. But I think that just on very practical levels, he, like many leaders in South Asia and beyond, would recognize China having a very specific value add or comparative advantage, and that is China's ability to provide quickly and at significant volume financial support for infrastructure and other forms of development assistance, which other countries can't provide as quickly or at the level that China is willing to. So I think that he would not be interested in agreeing to large numbers of new Chinese loans. He realizes that Sri Lanka has a debt crisis, but I think he'll definitely be interested in continuing to work with China commercially as its predecessors did.
Akanksha, sorry, I'm just going to say just on that, a couple of things. Savi says AKD was handed a country burdened with heavy foreign loans, making the task 100% challenging. That's just what you were saying, Michael. And just on that point that you made about AKD being a Marxist, we've been talking about this quite a lot earlier in the stream. We have more messages. Iman Said saying he is not a Marxist. He is centre left-centred, and this has come out quite a lot. So I don't know whether Michael, you just want to pick up on that point that you're saying he is Marxist, just quickly.
Yeah, that's an important point, and I was going to come back to that myself. It's important to clarify that he is seen by many as a Marxist. I think that was much more the case 20, 30 years ago than it is now. And I think that on many levels he comes across not even as a traditional populist, and maybe sort of a left of center type. I mean, first of all, he supports trade liberalization. He supports free trade. He supports multilateral donor assistance. He supports the IMF deal, right? I mean, we know that he wants to renegotiate the deal, but he agrees that Sri Lanka needs IMF support. So absolutely, I think that it would be inaccurate to describe him as a hardcore Marxist today. Certainly, when he was leading a party in the 1970s and 80s that was waging a violent campaign against so-called imperialists, then he was definitely a Marxist. But I think he really has evolved, and he has sought to, sort of separate himself and draw a very sharp line between what he did in the 70s and 80s and how he is now. Though certainly there's still going to be some skeptics that remember what he used to do. But absolutely, he's not a Marxist now in the sense that he was several decades ago.
Thank you for that clarification.
Akanksha, you've been listening to Michael talk about the China angle. I'd be curious if you could weigh in on how India is looking at all of this investment from Beijing, whether Delhi has responded. Has Delhi tried to invest? Has Delhi tried to build better relations when they have another great regional power sort of much closer to them than I'm sure they would prefer?
Well, both Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has congratulated AKD now, and we've seen the Chinese President Xi Jinping now also, congratulate AKD. So both of them, it really goes on to tell you how important is the strategic location of Sri Lanka is for both India and for China. Let's also, I'll go back to this interview that I conducted before these elections with the Foreign Minister Ali Sabri, and he told me that India remains Sri Lanka's most important strategic partner, and they want to continue to have that relationship with India. India has invested heavily in Sri Lanka as well, just like China has. We talk about the economic situation. Michael was talking about also the Chinese loans that have sort of also been very crucial in making the situation, the economic crisis, the failing economy as well, and that had happened. And AKD has in the past talked about, the Indian expansionism, and he's not seen as somebody who likes that very much. Despite that, he has been to India earlier this year in February. He met with Indian Foreign Minister. He went there with his team. He was talking to them. But recently, he also vowed and promised to not give support to a wind power plant that was coming up, was an Indian investment from Indian billionaire Adani. So it's something which is a pragmatic kind of an approach that AKD is trying to have. He understands that there are politically, for him, it is important to be seen also distance from both India and China, but also strategically, he has to maintain both the relations because they are such an important bilateral allies in the country. So it really
got it.
Sort of has this very interesting position in geopolitically, geostrategically in that region, and AKD would want to have that very strategic approach to it.
And let me just pick up from the chat again. Charindu Sadeep and Iman Sai both said almost word for word the same thing. AKD is not pro-China, neither pro-Indian. He is a pro-Sri Lankan. And that seems to be a point that's being made by some of the Sri Lankans in the chat. That is, this is all about Sri Lanka, and this is all about Sri Lanka trying to do the best, to make the best of the situation that they're finding themselves in, which hasn't obviously been so great over the last few years.
Yeah. Michael, I want to ask you about India, but before we do, just a reminder, if you're just joining us, that we're talking about Sri Lanka's path forward and Asia's response. And I also want to check in with Cherie, because I know you've been looking at all the comments and questions in chat. What's going on YouTube?
On YouTube. People have quite strong opinions about the new Sri Lankan president. I have also seen quite a number of comments showing hopes for the new president, actually. Let me read some of them. For example, previously when Alex mentioned a comment that is a challenge for AKD, someone said that it's a challenge, but we believe AKD can overcome that challenge. Someone also said that AKD is recognized as a politician with transparency and free of corruption. That's why our people wanted to break this corrupted political system that existed for 70 plus years. So yeah, in this chat, I've seen quite a lot of opinion about the
So it sounds like a lot of people who actually know the topic pretty well.
I think quite a lot of people say that they're actually from Sri Lanka. So I think we have quite a lot of inside knowledge in the chat.
Hi, everyone from Berlin. Michael, I wonder if you can weigh in. I know you talked about China, but what the India aspect of that, I imagine that you agree a fair bit with what Akanksha had said. Anything you'd like to add in terms of what he has to do? Because career politician, perhaps, but not that much foreign policy experience, right?
Yeah, that's correct. But I would agree with what both Akanksha and your Sri Lankan viewers that you cited had to say about about the new president's foreign policy outlook. You know, he's going to continue a pattern that we've seen with leaders not only in Sri Lanka but in many countries across South Asia, and that is to essentially use a hedging policy and work to manage relations with both India and China. Governments in many South Asian countries and countries across Asia on the whole, they many of them are formally not aligned in the sense that they don't want to sort of position themselves uniquely in one particular power's camp. And so this is why we're going to see that continuity. I expect, as was noted before, that AKD will want to pursue a healthy, workable, close partnership with India. As was noted before, he visited India during the campaign. He was invited by the Indian government. He has never been, at least in recent years, he has not been critical of India. He has been in the past, but again, as he's evolved and considerably away from his Marxist past, he's become less hostile. I don't think he's hostile to India at all. And I think he recognizes that just as China can provide unique benefits as a commercial partner in certain ways, India can as well. And if we go back to the worst days of Sri Lanka's economic crisis, it was India that actually emerged as one of the most generous external donors. It provided significant levels of financial support to the Sri Lankan government back then. And so I think that there'll be a recognition that it's important, particularly with Sri Lanka still in a very tenuous, fragile spot because of its economy, to engage with multiple players, multiple powers. And, one small benefit of, finding yourself in the middle of these great power competitions is that you're going to have both the Chinas and the Indias wanting to work with you to provide financial assistance to build influence at the end of the day. But that can work out well for Sri Lanka, which needs assistance from outside. So yeah, I think that contrary to some of these commentaries suggesting that this is a big loss for India, that Sri Lanka's going to go in the China camp, I think that's sort of getting carried away and sort of getting dragged into the zero-sum thinking that sometimes comes out of great power competition.
I know that, he hasn't had that much foreign policy experience, but is there a sense, not just with him, but people in Sri Lanka, that things like relations with China and its investments in Sri Lanka and things with relations with India need to be better managed in a way that hasn't really been when you have people in government and, in power that, are called Mr. 10% and so on and so forth. Is that something that there's a general sense and understanding of among policymakers and among the new leadership that we're looking at now? Let's start with Michael, but it's also a question for Akanksha.
Yeah, I think that the immediate concern of many in Sri Lanka is going to be domestic issues like the problems with corruption and obviously the economy and needing to move forward on that. My own view as an outsider is that Sri Lankan governments have, generally speaking, managed their relations with all of these different players quite well, not just China and India, but also the U.S. for that matter. Sri Lanka also has a very interesting relationship with Russia. It's not a hostile one by any means, as is the case with most South Asian countries, actually all South Asian countries. But I think there's something to be said for a little concern, just because indeed AKD does not have experience with foreign policy, and a big reason for that is he's never run a country, he's never done anything close to that. He has held a ministerial portfolio for a very brief period. That was some years ago, and it was domestically focused. So I do think that because of who he is, there's going to be a bit of concern. But here, one needs to look at who his advisors are. Who's going to be the new foreign minister, that type of thing. That will loom large.
And quite a lot of comments on foreign policy generally. Another one about AKD. This is from Shidan Shan. AKD said that he is open to relations with both China and India, just in a fruitful way for both countries. And Roman de Silva, again, coming back to this whole issue of corruption. He says, regarding foreign policy, previous governments used to install individuals not on meritocracy, but on their personal connection. The hope is that AKD focuses on building transparent relationships. Just as you were talking there, Michael, about who will be his new foreign minister as well. So that very much is a big theme going on throughout our chat.
We have quite a few smart analysts in our chat today.
We do. There are many. I could read many more.
I'm really impressed with this kind of insight and the need for nuance, which is often lacking, not just in news coverage, but just among people. So a lot of hope and a lot of, people wishing well for the country. Akanksha, any final thoughts before we let you go?
I tend to agree with what Michael has to say about Sri Lanka's pragmatism, and that is being in line with the rest of the South Asian neighbors. Let's also not forget, I mean, Sri Lanka was, has been a country that invited President Ibrahim Raisi this year, just weeks before his death in the chopper crash. And it continues to have these very interesting relations with Russia, Iran, China, US, India, all the players. And it is in a very interesting place geopolitically. That's why it has that a place, and a pragmatic leader can really use these relations for the betterment of the country. At the same time, I want to underline and say that Chinese investments in Sri Lanka have been a cause of public outcry and uproar, right? They came out on the streets. They were talking about all these bad loans that had come from China. So politically, AKD would not want to be seen domestically very pro-China as well. And obviously he wouldn't want to be seen as very pro-India as well. So this remains a kind of continuation of this very pragmatic challenge that that the leader is staring at. But it is something also that could be very beneficial for the country, with the right approach and with his cabinet, and who gets to be on different positions here as foreign minister and the economic minister. Yeah.
Michael, your final thoughts.
And I think that this is a really significant moment for Sri Lanka, and that you have a leader in place who certainly is not a revolutionary or even a traditional populist, but he was the change candidate, and he set high expectations for cleaning up house and making politics a lot cleaner. And yet the stakes are so high, right? Because he has these grand ambitions of how he's going to clean the country up and make policies and politics work better. But the economic crisis has not ended, and I think that's such an important point to make. Going back to what we discussed at the top, so many people are dealing with significant levels of economic stress. I think that means that there's a lot of hope for AKD, but also a lot of pressure, a lot of high expectations on him, and a lot of pressure. And if he doesn't come through, if he's not seen as coming through relatively quickly, that could heighten public unhappiness. And in that regard, another key issue to be watching for in the coming days: will he dissolve parliament? Will he decide to hold parliamentary elections? That could be pretty significant moving forward as well. So a lot of hope, I think, but also a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainties moving forward.
He has decided that, hasn't he, that he is going to do that, and that elections are going to be held in early November. That's certainly the news that we heard today. Yep. So it will be very interesting to watch that and to see what happens, because, of course, he doesn't have many from his own party in Parliament, and that's what he needs, doesn't he, to be able to fill those key positions.
Michael Kugelman, Akanksha Saxena.
His party has very few seats.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that was super interesting.
I mean, there are so many comments, and I know that I have not touched all the comments that have been made, and I apologise. It's certainly great that there seem to be so many Sri Lankans who are commenting on this. There was somebody earlier up who said, you need to come to Sri Lanka and see for yourself. Well, actually, I have been to Sri Lanka. It's the most beautiful country, and I would love to come back very soon. So thank you for the invite. We've even had Salon Travel Guru, who's been commenting quite a bit as well. And, just really a big shout out to everyone who's really made the effort to try to help us and enlighten us as well as to what's going on in Sri Lanka. But great hope, as Cherie said, for AKD, for the new president, that things will be changing, and that's certainly coming across.
Well, with such a knowledgeable group in chat, do we have the result of the poll?
Yeah, We have got quite a lot of votes. This time we have over 1,000 votes.
Oh, wow.
Thanks for everyone for participating. 44% is the option. Oh, I should repeat the question, actually. Yeah. What's the most important task for Sri Lanka's new president? 44% of the votes go to reforming the economy, which we have talked a lot, quite a lot about in this conversation. And 32% goes for tackling corruption, 15% says political stability, and 7% says relations with China and India.
Very interesting. I did think it was very interesting what Michael was saying in particular. Well, they were both saying, but how Sri Lanka now has to play all sides in the region. They can't afford to go with one and not the other. They just need to make it work. I thought that was very interesting.
And just this intense hope from people that comes with so many expectations, as Michael was saying at the end there. I guess, people really desperately want to get out of this really severe economic crisis, to be able to pay for things, to be able to afford to live. And he is the change candidate and has a lot to promise, but his hands are also kind of tied by the simple realities of governing something that he doesn't really have much experience with, and also the terms of the bailouts and the loans that Sri Lanka has had to take in order to be able to move forward. So there's just a lot kind of going on as he starts.
Yeah, I think what's really exciting, though, is there is a sense that there's so much potential from the people and for the country to go beyond what it's had to deal with the last few years.
Absolutely. I mean, there is this sort of optimism, isn't there? And that's why I guess a lot of people have really gotten behind him. And I guess as these parliamentary elections happen, we'll have to see if this momentum behind him and his party is able to continue and how much he really can get done.
Yeah, because he needs more than 3.
He needs more than 3 seats.
Doesn't he? Yeah, definitely to do anything.
We'll see about that, and maybe we might follow up after the elections. That was a fantastic news desk. Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you so much, Cherie. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, those who are from Sri Lanka and those who are new to the topic. We hope that you found this chat interesting and learned something.
And you can join us again next week. You can check out our community tab on YouTube about 24 hours before, so on the Tuesday, to find out what we will be discussing. And then we very much hope that we will see you next week. Thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good day.